But let's break down the numbers, and I gave you a sort of overview of the import of Russian oil between the months of July, August and September, and there's nothing to suggest that there's any substantial drop. There might be a minor drop, but nothing substantial in terms of India dropping its purchase of Russian oil. So why then is Donald Trump making these claims which are completely bereft of facts? Not once, but on multiple occasions. His comments have been fact-checked by India, the government of India, the spokesperson of the MEA. Will this latest development now throw a spanner in the works of the ongoing trade negotiations? The Indian negotiating team is in the US even as we speak. And more importantly, there is a possibility of a meeting between both the leaders at the end of this month at the ASEAN summit in Malaysia. Will these public comments, first by Trump and a denial by the government of India, the MEA spokesperson, will that dampen the chances of that possible meeting end of this month?
We missed you. We missed you a lot.
US President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi had assured him that New Delhi would stop buying oil from Russia, calling it a big step in Trump's push to isolate Moscow over the war in Ukraine. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump said that he had flagged concerns with Prime Minister Modi about India's continued import of Russian oil.
Yeah, sure. He's a friend of mine. We have a great relationship. He just said that 2 days ago, as you know. We have a great relationship. No, we were not happy with him buying oil from Russia because that lets Russia continue on with this ridiculous war where they've lost 1.5 million people, by the way. Russia's lost 1.5 million people, soldiers mostly. This is a war that should have never started, but it's a war that Russia should have won in the first week, and they're going into the fourth year. And I want to see it stop. So I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop.
However, New Delhi has not confirmed Trump's claim that India will halt Russian imports.
See, on the issue of energy sourcing, we have made a statement. This was put out in the morning today. We would request you to look at that particular statement for the questions that you have. On the question of whether there was a conversation or a telephone call between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, I am not aware of any conversation yesterday.
Now, this claim by Trump is a high-stakes gamble. If it is true, and so far there is no evidence to show that there is a modicum of truth in what Trump is claiming, but if it is, then it's a dramatic shift in Delhi's energy diplomacy and also a significant shift in its pragmatic relationship with Moscow. But the public record that's been put out by both parties, as well as, of course, the available trade data, does not show any significant drop in India's import of Russian oil. Also, India's strategic constraints make any immediate unconditional pledge to cut Russian oil by Modi extremely unlikely. India remains the world's third largest oil importer after America and China. After Western sanctions on Moscow pushed Russian crude oil onto the discounted market, Indian refiners have secured long-term commercial deals that delivered very cheap oil at very attractive freight terms. Rewriting those commercial arrangements overnight would impose a large cost on refiners as well as on consumers. Crude oil supply relationships are not simply political statements like the one that Trump has made. They are physical supply chains and contractual allocations. No overnight change is possible there, particularly when the commercials are still attractive for buying cheap Russian crude.
It's all price sensitive. I mean, if cheaper energy is available, and it's a very complicated game. It's not something that I can sit and determine. There is a cost of production per barrel, international price, which you all monitor in terms of one system or the other system. Then you add to that the cost of insurance, the cost of freight, the dollar exchange rate, and several other things. And then it works out. So I think the good news is that we import from a large number of sources. New suppliers are coming on the market. By the way, I mean, to those of you who are listening to me after a long time, there is more and more energy coming on the global market, and more is coming from the Western Hemisphere.
There is also the geopolitical angle. India courts its strategic partnership with the United States while at the same time maintaining a long and multifaceted relationship with Russia when it comes to defense, nuclear energy, and regional diplomacy. India's policy has been to navigate a multipolar balancing act. A sudden, publicly announced abandonment of Russian energy ties under American pressure, would risk political blowback at home, something that no prime minister can afford. Also, Russian President Putin is expected in India in the first week of December. The Indian government would not make such a shocking and public concession just ahead of a high-profile visit. Any supply shock or price rise could also follow a rushed exit from Russian crude, will be politically costly in India, particularly ahead of the keenly fought Bihar state elections. Leaders calculate both strategic payoff and also domestic political calculations. A pledge that raises petrol and diesel prices will be a hard sell ahead of crucial state elections. But the numbers also belie Trump's claims. A Reuters snapshot last month said that Russia's share had dipped slightly in August and in early September after earlier peaks, but India still remained a major buyer of Russian oil. More than a third of India's oil supplies in the month of September came from Russia. India was Russia's second biggest customer after China. An Economic Times compilation from April to September 2025 showed an 8% year-on-year fall in Russian crude, that in the first 6-month period of 2025, there was some moderation in India's purchase of Russian oil. India used to import up to 2 million barrels per day from Russia at its peak. Now that has somewhat moderated to around 1.5 million barrels per day. The bilateral relationship between America and India has been a bumpy one in recent months. A mix of public pressure, tariff threats, and of course, repeated claims by Trump of him mediating in the India-Pakistan conflict earlier this year has soured ties. Something that Trump has repeated at the White House this week, but something that India contests very dearly.
We stopped a lot of these wars using trade. We had, as an example, India and Pakistan were going at it really hard. Our 7 planes were shot down. It was going to happen. Bad things would happen. And I was talking, both of them, about trade. And I said, how are we doing with this? I said, sir, we're doing very well by trade. Well, if you're not going to do well, I'm not going to do a trade deal. Let's say, stop the war. And I got him on the phone and I said, listen.
All right, I want to go across to Professor Brahmachalani, strategic affairs expert. The concerning thing is not so much, what Trump said, and clearly the government of India through the MEA spokesperson has refuted it, but it's the timing of what he has said and when he has said it, because this is coming at a time when the trade negotiations are at a delicately balanced stage. The negotiating team is in the US right now, and they were hoping that they can unveil something when the two leaders could meet at the end of this month in Kuala Lumpur on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit. Now this public pronouncement by Trump and a public denial by India, how does that play out over the next couple of weeks? Does it put the meeting itself in jeopardy?
Saka, first you summed up the India-Russia relationship and why it's unlikely that India would abruptly halt purchases of Russian energy. And it's important to remember why Trump keeps repeating the same claims again and again. And there is a pattern, not just a pattern, but a method to this, because by repeating the same false information again and again, he creates this illusion that this false information actually may be true. At least his base at home would believe that false information. This is the same strategy he used to repeatedly claim to question the legitimacy and results of the 2020 presidential election. So about 40% of Americans today believe that the 2020 presidential election was rigged against Trump. Similarly, how many times has he repeated the same claim that he used the trade sanctions threat to end the India-Pakistan 3-day war? He has repeated that, I think, at least more than 100 times publicly. Yeah. And again, he repeated that this week. By repeating that again and again, he seeks to turn an untruth into a fact. And unfortunately, this pattern not only is unprecedented, it undermines public confidence in established facts. And in the US, his claims, patent lies, are also undermining confidence in government institutions and the media. But coming back to his specific claim in relation to India and Russian oil purchases, look at it more broadly, Zaka, that he has not managed to even get America's allies in Europe to end their Russian energy purchases. And yet, he wants to dictate India's oil import policy. Look at the paradox. Europe is America's close ally. And if you look at Europe's purchases of Russian energy, by Europe I mean the EU plus Britain, their monthly purchases of Russian energy exceed India's oil imports from Russia. And yet, despite saying in public that Europe should stop buying Russian energy, he has exerted no pressure on Europe to stop buying Russian energy. He has singled out India. India is the sole and only target of Trump's secondary sanctions over Russian energy imports.
Okay.
So he is clearly targeting India. And even as he claimed that Modi has assured him that India will stop buying Russian oil, he has not signaled a willingness to end those secondary sanctions on India, which are in the form of 25% additional tariffs on Indian goods.
But tell me, Professor, it also comes at an interesting time, and I guess we don't talk about it enough here in the Indian media, but it's been all over the Western press. China last week deciding to put significant export controls on rare earths. Trump had a lashing out reaction last Friday. The markets fell. They're still trying to figure out whether this is chapter 2 in the trade war between China and the United States, the two biggest economies. Do you think that India has an opportunity here to try and close out the trade negotiations with the United States, which have been hanging fire for the last 6 months?
You ask a very good question, Zaka. Look at the contrast between China's response and India's response. China is leveraging its strengths. In fact, it's mirroring America's punitive actions in order to create leverage in negotiations with Washington. While India is trying to be the good boy by refraining from any kind of counter retaliation against the US. For example, no counter tariffs. This is in contrast to Trump's first term, when he slapped some trade punitive actions against India, including stripping India of its GSA trade status and putting tariffs on Indian steel and aluminum exports to the US. The Modi government at that time imposed targeted counter tariffs on 28 American products, which galvanized trade negotiations because Washington came under pressure from American exporters. Mm-hmm. And those trade negotiations eventually led to a trade deal right just before the 2023 G20 summit in New Delhi. This time, India has decided not to use any kind of negotiating leverage and to enter negotiations without going empty-handed virtually into the negotiations. So I'm concerned about the fact that whatever India was offering until July, India may be now forced to offer cede more ground in the trade negotiations.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Professor Brahmachalani, always a pleasure speaking with you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18.